Some stories aren't fiction, yet they are stranger and more painful than anything a writer could imagine. Some betrayals aren't just lies. They shatter the very foundation of trust, love, and humanity itself. Welcome to Echoes of Crime, where real-life cases unravel the hidden truths behind justice and tragedy. Like, comment, and support the channel to help us bring more gripping, true crime stories to you. And this is the story of a man, Kenzo Jalil Whitmore, a brilliant engineer, a man of principles, and above all, a devoted husband and father. From a young age, Kenzo never had a complete family. His father left before he was even old enough to remember his face. His mother, Lorraine Whitmore, a strong and resilient woman, worked tirelessly to raise him alone. Kenzo was disciplined, hardworking, and determined to build a life his mother could be proud of. And when he met Zafira Mahoney, he believed he had finally found the missing piece of his life. Zafira, a woman who was captivating, intelligent, and ambitious. A journalist always chasing the next big story. A woman whose confidence drew people in like a magnet. Their love was fast, passionate. Their wedding was simple, yet filled with happiness. 2 years later, they had a daughter, Amina Whitmore. For Kenzo, she was everything. His in a family, his on home, his on future. But what Kenzo didn't know was his fairy tale had never been real, because the woman he loved wasn't who he thought she was. And on one fateful night, his entire world collapsed. March 9th, 2016, the call that changed everything. A cold, rainy night. Raindrops slid down the glass windows of an office building. The city of New Orleans was shrouded in silence, save for the dim lights reflecting off the exhausted face of Kenzo Jalil Whitmore. He sat at his desk, eyes heavy from fatigue. His work demanded everything from him, but he never complained, because it was all for his family, for his wife, for his daughter. His phone vibrated. An unknown number. Kenzo frowned, hesitating for a second before picking up. "Hello?" A deep, cold voice answered. "Is this Kenzo Whitmore?" A strange unease crept into his chest. "Yes, this is him." The person on the other end took a breath, then spoke slowly, deliberately, as if delivering a final sentence. "Mr. Whitmore, we regret to inform you your wife, Zafira Mahoney Whitmore, has died in a horrific car accident." Time stood still. The ticking of the clock suddenly felt deafening. The sounds of the city faded into a distant hum. "No, this can't be," Kenzo whispered, but the officer's voice remained unwavering, simply stating a fact that could not be changed. "The crash happened on the interstate. Her car caught fire upon impact. We couldn't recover any DNA evidence to confirm the body." Kenzo's breath hitched in his throat. "No, you must be mistaken. She was on her way home. She can't be gone." But his words changed nothing. "We found only 2 items intact in the wreckage," the officer continued, his voice even. "A wedding ring and a gold necklace." Kenzo froze. The ring he had placed on Zafira's finger on their wedding day. The necklace she had never once taken off. The undeniable proof. His phone slipped from his fingers, his hands trembling. A crushing weight settled over his chest, making it hard to breathe. Zafira was gone. She was really, truly gone. 1 week later, the funeral was held. An enclosed casket. A solemn ceremony filled with grief, unanswered questions, and disbelief. There was no body to bury. No one had seen her face one last time. Kenzo stood before the casket, his eyes hollow, empty. The condolences, the embraces, the whispered words of comfort, none of it mattered. Because deep down, he still couldn't believe Zafira was truly gone. They say a time heals all wounds. But in that moment, Kenzo knew. Some wounds never heal. He thought this was the worst pain he would ever endure. But he was wrong, because 7 years later, a truth far more horrifying was about to be revealed. Because 7 years had passed since that fateful night, time might blur memories, but for Kenzo Jalil Whitmore, it only made the pain sharper, deeper, and more unbearable. He was no longer the man he once was. Not the loving husband, not the devoted father filled with warmth and laughter. Instead, he had become a shadow of himself. A man trapped in the past, reliving memories that had no end. Kenzo never remarried, never loved again, never dated. He had devoted his life to one thing and one thing only. His daughter, Amina Whitmore. Amina was the only light left in his world. She had his eyes, but her smile belonged to her mother, a bright, sensitive, and intelligent girl who did everything she could to bring joy to the father she loved so much. But no matter how hard she tried, she could never fill the void in Kenzo's heart. Every morning he woke up early to take her to school. Every evening he returned home to a dinner table, set for two. Their conversations were often short, their meals stretched in silence. Kenzo never spoke about Amina's mother. She had grown older, but she never truly understood what had happened. Some nights, Amina stood by the window, waiting for someone who would never return. The only person who kept Kenzo from her completely falling apart was Lorraine Whitmore, his mother, a strong woman who had raised Kenzo on her own, and now she had taken on another responsibility, helping her son survive his grief. She cooked warm meals, she offered quiet words of encouragement. She watched him with worried eyes, knowing he was drowning in the darkness. And then, there was one more person, Isle Darnell Kane, his best friend, his sworn brother. From the moment Zafira died, Isle was always there. He arranged the funeral. He took care of Amina when Kenzo was too lost in his grief. He was the only one who could pull Kenzo out of his nightmares. You can't keep living like this, Kenzo. It's time to move on, man. But how could he move on when the past held on to him like a ghost that refused to let go? And then, one day, everything changed. One evening, Amina looked into her father's tired eyes and asked, "Dad, why don't you ever smile anymore?" A simple question, but it cut through Kenzo like a knife. He didn't know how to answer. He couldn't even remember the last time he truly smiled. And in that moment, something shifted. Amina took his hand, her eyes filled with hope. "Dad, let's go on a trip." Kenzo froze. A trip? He hadn't left the city since the day Zafira died. Had never once thought about enjoying life. But Amina was right. He had spent 7 years drowning in sorrow. 7 years imprisoned in his own memories. 7 years forgetting that he was still alive. And for the first time in 7 years, Kenzo decided to do something different. He booked the tickets. He and his daughter would take a vacation. He never imagined that this trip would change everything. Because there, on a distant island, he would see someone who was supposed to have been dead for 7 years. Atramaform, a peaceful evening at the resort. The sky was painted in brilliant shades of orange as the sun dipped below the horizon. A gentle ocean breeze carried the salty scent of the sea, blending with the rhythmic sound of waves lapping against the shore. At a beachfront cafe, Kenzo Jalil Whitmore sat quietly sipping a glass of strong liquor after a long day of exploring with his daughter. For the first time in 7 years, he felt at ease. Amina was sound asleep in their hotel room. This trip had turned out to be exactly what she needed, and perhaps exactly what E had unknowingly been searching for. Kenzo leaned back in his chair, took a deep breath, and let the tranquility of the night wash over him. He had no idea that in just a few seconds, everything in his world was about to turn upside down. Just as he was about to stand up and leave, he froze. His eyes were drawn to a man walking along the shoreline. That posture, that gait, too familiar. His heart pounded violently in his chest. I'll Kane. Kenzo's entire body went rigid. A voice in his head whispered instinctively, "No, it can't be." I'll Kane, his sworn brother. The man who stood by him in his darkest days. The one who held his hand when he was on the brink of collapse. The person he trusted the most. But why was he here? Kenzo's mind scrambled for a logical explanation. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe Ale had also come for a vacation and hadn't told him. But something felt wrong. And then, the real shock hit him. A woman walked up behind Ale. She placed her hand on his arm, softly, naturally, as if she had done it 1,000 times before. Kenzo felt his entire body go numb. The world around him suddenly fell silent. The ocean breeze still blew. Laughter from nearby tourists still echoed in the air. But to Kenzo, everything had blurred into nothingness, because that woman was Zafira Mahoney Whitmore. His dead wife, the woman he had grieved for 7 long years, the woman he had buried deep in his heart, the woman he had spent endless nights mourning, tormented by the thought of what he could have done to save her from that horrific fate. She was standing there. She was alive. And she was happy by Ale's side. Kenzo felt like someone had punched him straight in the gut. A tidal wave of rage surged through his veins. Zafira laughed. She tilted her head, kissed Ale softly on the cheek, and smiled radiantly, as if the entire world existed just for the two of them. For 7 years, Kenzo had carried her memory every single day. He had tormented himself with guilt. He had lived in the darkness of her death. He had cried. He had broken. He had suffered. He had raised their daughter. Alone. And all this time, she had been enjoying a brand new life. Kenzo's grip on his glass tightened, his knuckles turning white from the force. 7 years. 7 years in hell, only to realize that hell had never even existed. They had planned this. They had lied to him. They had stolen his life. Kenzo couldn't look away, but at this moment, they had no idea he was watching. She had deceived him, and Ale had betrayed him. A firestorm of rage burned in his chest, and he knew this was only the beginning. Kenzo had no idea how long he had been standing there. The world around him had faded into insignificance. The sounds of the ocean, the chatter of nearby tourists, the gentle clinking of glasses, all of it blurred into the background. All that remained was the image of 2 traitors laughing together, as if the last 7 years had never even happened. 7 years of his suffering, 7 years of raising their daughter alone, 7 years of blaming himself for not being able to protect his wife. But it was all a perfect lie. Kenzo's breathing grew heavier, but he suppressed every emotion boiling inside him. He couldn't afford to act on impulse. He needed the truth. Quietly, he started following them. From a distance, he watched as Isle and Zafira strolled hand in hand along the beach, whispering to each other with eyes full of affection. No fear, no hesitation, not a single glance over their shoulders. They truly believed their secret would never be discovered. Kenzo trailed them as they entered a luxurious seaside restaurant where they were seated at an intimate table with a breathtaking ocean view, fine wine poured into delicate glasses, exquisite meals presented like works of art. A perfect life, a life he never knew existed. But inside his mind, a storm was brewing. Kenzo sat at the bar nearby, his eyes locked onto them, and then like knives slicing through his thoughts, the questions started tearing into him. How is she still alive? Why is Ale here with her? How long have they been planning this behind my back? He closed his eyes and the memories flooded back. The police had told him there was no DNA evidence, only a wedding ring and a gold necklace, recovered from the burning car. But what if the body in the car wasn't hers? What if the accident was nothing more than a stage performance? Now everything was clear. Safira had faked her death. Ale had helped her escape. Together they had orchestrated the perfect accident to disappear. Kenzo felt an uncontrollable rage surge through his chest, his fists clenched so tightly that his nails dug into his palms, his blood boiling with fury. What had they been thinking when they did this to him? Did they ever consider what they were leaving behind? Did they ever care about the daughter he raised alone while they lived their perfect, hidden life? Safira hadn't been kidnapped. She hadn't been forced into this. She had chosen to walk away from everything, and Ail had betrayed their brotherhood in the cruelest way imaginable. He could have picked up the phone and called the police right then and there, but no, that wasn't enough. Kenzo took a deep breath, setting his glass down. 7 years of pain would not be undone with a single phone call. He needed answers, and he would get them his way. Mariner Grand Resort was quiet that night. The warm golden lights illuminated the marble hallway, casting a soft glow on the polished floors, but no amount of warmth could quell the rage surging inside. Kenzo Jalil Whitmore. Curtain. He stood outside the door, waiting. Inside, Safira Mahoney. Whitmore had no idea that her nightmare was about to begin. A knock echoed through the silence. 3 taps, sharp, unwavering. Footsteps shuffled inside. The door creaked open. And then, Safira's face went pale when she saw who was standing before her. Kenzo. Without a word, he stepped forward, pushing the door open forcefully, slamming it shut behind him. No escape. No way out. Safira staggered backward, her eyes darting around the room, searching for an exit. But there was none. What's wrong? No hug for me. Kenzo's voice was cold, mocking. She stammered. You, Kenzo, I can't believe. How did you? Kenzo cut her off. How long were you planning to keep lying to me? Safira trembled, but within seconds she straightened her posture, forcing a strange smile onto her lips. How much do you know? Kenzo's hands clenched into fists, struggling to contain the fury burning inside him. Everything. A heavy silence settled between them. Safira exhaled deeply, her gaze falling to the floor, and then she confessed. She never died. The car crash was staged. The body in the vehicle was an unclaimed corpse from the morgue, and the person who orchestrated it all was Ale. Kenzo felt his entire world collapse. It had all been a plan from the start. Every tear he shed over the past 7 years had been for nothing. His jaw tightened, fists trembling with restrained fury. Why? Why the hell would you do this? Safira looked him dead in the eyes. Not a trace of regret. Because I was bored. Kenzo's breath hitched. What? Safira shrugged. I was tired of our marriage. Tired of being a mother. Tired of living a life that felt like a cage. Kenzo stood frozen. This wasn't real. He had to be imagining this. His voice dropped, low, cold, dangerously controlled. Did you ever think about our daughter? Safira hesitated. She licked her lips, eyes shifting slightly, but then she said nothing. Kenzo's patience snapped. You let her grow up without a mother while you lived in luxury with that bastard? Safira lowered her head, but no tears fell. And in that moment, Kenzo understood everything. She never cared about her daughter. She never cared about him. She only cared about herself. Kenzo took a slow, deep breath. He had heard enough, but there was still one more person to deal with. He pulled out his phone, dialing. His voice was eerily calm. Hey, buddy, come to room 207. Safira has something to tell you. On the other end, Ayel had no idea. Oh yeah, all right, I'm on my way. Kenzo ended the call. He slipped his phone back into his pocket and slowly turned to face Safira. She went pale. She knew what was coming. Kenzo smirked. Sit tight. We've got one more person to talk to. And then he waited for the final confrontation. The room was heavy with silence. Safira sat frozen. Her face pale, hands clenched tightly together as if trying to hold herself together. Kenzo stood by the door, his gaze cold as ice, waiting in absolute silence. A few minutes passed. A knock echoed through the room. 3 taps, sharp, unwavering. And then the door opened. Ayel Darnell Kane stepped inside. He entered with a casual ease, his usual cocky smirk, lingering, as if nothing in the world could shake him. But then he froze, his eyes locked onto Kenzo. And for just 1 second, every ounce of confidence drained from his face. The air in the room felt suffocating. Safira gasped quietly, her gaze flicking toward Ayel, but she dared not say a word. The door closed behind him. Kenzo took a slow step forward, his eyes void of any warmth. How long? His voice was low, dry, a whisper before the storm. Ayel curled his lips into a slight smirk, still trying to hold on to control. Everything comes to an end, old friend. And then he chuckled, a smug, condescending laugh. Kenzo closed his eyes for a brief second, inhaling deeply, and then the world shattered in an instant. A gunshot rang out. Ayel staggered, his gaze dropped to his chest, a deep crimson stain spreading across his expensive white linen shirt. His hands trembled as they clutched at the wound, as if he couldn't believe what had just happened. He took a shaky step backward, but his knees buckled. He collapsed. No more arrogance, no more cocky smirks, no more words of mockery, just a man dying on the cold, hard floor. Safira screamed, terror flooding her wide, disbelieving eyes. She stumbled back, hands covering her mouth, body trembling. Kenzo, don't, please, I'm begging you. But Kenzo just stood there, staring at her with lifeless eyes. You let me mourn you for 7 years. Now it's your turn. Another shot rang out. No more pleading, no more screams, no more words. Just how 2 lifeless bodies on the floor, drenched in crimson. Kenzo stood there, alone amidst the ruins of a love that had never been real. His gaze dropped to Zafira, then to Ail, the two people who had destroyed his life. Now, they could never hurt anyone again. Kenzo lowered the gun, closing his eyes as he took a slow, deep breath. The room was suffocatingly silent. The scent of gunpowder still lingered in the air. Kenzo picked up his phone. His hands no longer trembled. He dialed the number. His voice was dry, yet eerily calm. Send the police to Mariner Grand Resort, room 207. There's been a murder. Hero paused for a second, then added, the murderer is me. The trial, months later. Kenzo did not resist. He pleaded guilty to murder. No excuses, no attempts to defend himself. The prosecutor turned to the jury, voice razor sharp. Kenzo Whitmore didn't just kill two people. He appointed himself as judge, jury, and executioner. No matter how great the betrayal, the law does not grant him the right to decide who lives and who dies. The defense attorney fought back fiercely. Kenzo is not a cold-blooded murderer. He suffered the kind of betrayal most of us couldn't even fathom. This wasn't just a killing. It was a man taking back what had been stolen from him. The courtroom fell into complete silence. Then the judge delivered the final verdict. The court sentences Kenzo Whitmore to 35 years in prison. No possibility of parole. As the sentence was read, no one clapped. No one cheered. In the crowd, a 10-year-old girl sat quietly. Amina Whitmore. She lost her mother at 3 years old. Now she lost her father too. There would be no one to tuck her in at night, no one to hold her hand on the way to school. She watched her father. Her eyes filled with questions that no one could answer. Kenzo had taken justice into his own hands. But the price he paid, it was too high. So, did he truly do the right thing? If you were Kenzo, what would you have done? Was justice really served, or was this just a tragedy spiraling out of control? Did Amina deserve to suffer for the sins of her parents? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story made you think, don't forget to like and subscribe so we can continue bringing you more real-life haunting stories like this.